Whilst Haaland still isn't fit to play a full match, do we captain Alvarez, who's got potentially the highest ceiling, but also the riskiest expected minutes, and his teammate Foden might have something to say about that because he's been nailed for 90 minutes every game lately. Another strong contender is Richarlison. He's a midfielder playing out of position, gets 5 points for every goal scored instead of 4, but his opponents might be more difficult, and we will discuss that later. The Brazilian's got the best non-penalty stats per 90 minutes for this season, his expected numbers are the most promising, and he's delivering on them as well. It would be ideal to have Son playing next to him, but at least Maddison's coming back into the team, so he's going to get more creativity behind him. To be fair, that does apply to the City players as well, with De Bruyne coming back in the team. There's not much to split those two. Their output of non-penalty return points per 90 minutes is exactly the same. To be fair to Alvarez, he does only get 4 points for every goal scored, and he gets 4 points for every non-penalty XG registered in the underlying stats as well, which means he's got the better stats from a footballing perspective, but they're roughly the same as Foden's from an FPL perspective. Alvarez's underlying stats are slightly more promising, but what also should be considered is some of these are when he was playing further away from goal because Haaland was on the pitch. Now he is playing closer to goal, and a bit more weighting should be applied to that. Something else that goes against Foden is the fact that he's not in the running for penalty duties. If City are awarded a penalty, it's questionable who will take that. It just depends who's on the pitch. Of course, Haaland could get subbed on, he would definitely take it, but if it's Alvarez and De Bruyne on the pitch, there is a bit of competition there. Alvarez does have a slightly better record, so I would put my money on him, but it's not 100%. It wouldn't be clear for Spurs either in Son's absence. I think it should be Richarlison because he's got the best record, but of course it could be Maddison or Werner as well. As for free kicks and corners, Alvarez has been the set-piece specialist for City recently, but if De Bruyne is on the pitch, he will take most of them off him. However, I do expect Alvarez to play more minutes than De Bruyne in this match, and whilst De Bruyne is off the pitch, he will probably take all of the indirect free kicks, direct free kicks, and most of the corners as well. In that scenario, Foden will take some corners, but Alvarez will be present for the short corners on that side as well. As for Richarlison, he doesn't compete with Porro or Maddison. Now let's take a look at the probability of each player scoring and assisting. Just remember that these odds are based on the assumption that each player plays 90 minutes, and we will scrutinise the expected minutes later on in the video. It's Alvarez who's got the highest anytime goal scorer odds by quite a margin. Foden's got the highest anytime assist odds, but of course that's not as important because you get more points for every goal scored than you do for an assist. But if we're going to factor that in, we've got to consider the fact that Foden and Richarlison get an extra point per every goal scored, which means the weighted odds are quite close between the three of them. Whilst Foden's slightly more likely to return than Richarlison, I do prefer the fact that Richarlison's odds are weighted heavily on goals. That's something that applies to Alvarez as well, but his chance of assisting is also decent, which is why his anytime return odds are so high. He's got the highest chance of success and the lowest chance of blanking, so whilst he gets 1 less point for every goal scored, I do think he's got the most favourable odds. His points projections are no less favourable either. He's got the highest overall on Fantasy Football Fix with 7.4, and he edges it on FPL Review with 6.4. The other two players don't trail by much on that data model, but if you consider both data models put together, they're miles behind. By comparing the opposition's defence, we can see that Richarlison's got the most difficult fixture this game week. Brentford's expected goals conceded per 90 minutes figure's not too bad. To be fair, they've conceded quite a lot of goals per 90 minutes, but a lot of that is down to Flecken. His post-shot XG is actually the worst in the whole league. Burnley have underperformed their underlying stats in defence as well, but the most important thing here is the expected goals conceded figure, because that's the best at projecting future goals conceded than actual goals conceded themselves, and their defence is quite a bit worse than Brentford's. Then when you compare their defence to City's attack, it's no surprise that their clean sheet odds are only 3%. Before we draw up a conclusion, we're going to carry out a quick risk assessment. All three players have had the exact same amount of recovery days, however when it comes to the minutes played in the most recent fixture, Alvarez was dragged off early. Now there's two different narratives that you can attach to this. If De Bruyne doesn't start against Burnley, does that mean that he's going to get subbed on for Alvarez and he'll be the player to make way? Or it could also mean it was Alvarez's turn to have a bit of a rest because the substitution in the match before this where De Bruyne came on, it wasn't for Alvarez. Of course this risk has been factored into the expected minutes. Foden's not near 90, although he has been nailed recently. He's been playing 90 minutes in every single match, but maybe against Burnley at home, if they're winning, he might be the player to make way so he gets a bit of a rest himself. Something that suited Foden in the last match. For the last 25 minutes, whilst Alvarez wasn't on the pitch, he played as a false 9 up front. But of course, Pep is unpredictable with his tactics from game to game. Another thing that brings down the expected minutes is the potential that Haaland might possibly come off the bench. I do think that would be more likely to be for Alvarez. That's because it would be a forward for a forward, but it is just speculation. Alvarez could play in a role that he was doing before Haaland was injured, and he was getting plenty of minutes then. Whilst Richarlison's got the safest expected minutes, and he is still a good option for captaincy this game week, I do want a piece of that City attack when they've got a 97% chance of scoring at least one goal. When it comes to the City options, I don't think there's much between them. I think Foden is a slightly safer option because of his expected minutes, but for me, I think it's worth taking a risk on the expected minutes and going for the slightly higher ceiling. Unless we get leaked team news he's not starting, I'm going to captain Alvarez this game week. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any videos like this.